All Things Data podcast. In the spirit of Daniel Kahneman, Peter Diamandis, and Google Moonshots, brings together leading data scientists, technologists, business model experts, and futurists to discuss how to utilize, harness, and deploy data science and data-driven strategies to enable digital transformation. The hosts are Dr. Manjeet Rege, Associate Professor of Data Science, and Dan Yarmala, Director of Business Development of IoT and Data Science.
Today I've got with us Andrew Katon, who I've known for a number of years. In fact, met in the early days of his company, but I'll give a quick background and then Andrew, you can fill in all the gaps that I'm gonna miss here. But Andrew's been active in the 3D printing, additive manufacturing space for a number of years. I started getting involved with him,
probably back in 2014.
Yeah, you're right. Something like that. Right. When you were going through an accelerator program, and then kind of stuck around. Yeah, so I guess Andrew, I'll let you take it from there. Andrew's the CEO of Cobbler Technologies, and Andrew, why don't you tell us a little bit about what Cobbler does?
Sure. Thanks for having me on the show. So, as Tom had mentioned, we've been working on Cobbler Technologies for a number of years. We're, in the 3D printing space, but, we do a couple of things there. So the key thing that we've been working on over the last several years is trying to bridge the gap between, where 3D printing's promise is supposed to be and where it actually is today. So, what does that even look like, right? We've all heard, the stories that 3D printing would, change everything. Well, it hasn't. We've seen a lot of...
Seems to be typical with a lot of the buzzword technologies that you hear about.
Right. But, I started looking at, why is this? Digging in and researching the fundamentals of the market. So, we've all seen some really incredible things happen, particularly in, consumer grade 3D printers. Really interesting shapes come to life. Definitely during the COVID crisis, we've seen a number of people, 3D print medical supplies. But, a lot of people have also seen some of this stuff in the dental industry with implants, or even in the aerospace industry where, GE a number of years back started to 3D print turbine components out of metal. So, there's these glimmering pieces of evidence showing that, 3D printing will eventually kind of take over in an industrial revolution, but we're not really there. And so our goal was to try to figure out, why that is and try to help make good on that initial promise. So we started looking at this market, and I initially started the company as a 3D printing services bureau. We had a number of customers, everything from, an entrepreneur starting out in their garage to large, Fortune 500 companies. What became super apparent is the benefit of using additive manufacturing for prototypes, particularly, things like assemblies that will eventually be injection molded, that their designers need to figure out if the shapes are correct, if everything, fits together. So really reducing that time to market for them. But in a few niche applications, we were kind of surprised. Our customers came back and said, hey, this is fantastic. Can we have 1,000 of these? Our response is, yeah, absolutely. And, we provide a quote for services, and the customer is a little shocked. The piece of shock came into play, there was an expectation that's been built over the last several decades that when you increase order volume on any product, there are economies of scale that come into play and really drop the cost of something that is being produced, right?
Andrew,
you order more materials, everything becomes cheaper.
At this time, were you using your own machines, or were you using machines made by other 3D printer machine manufacturers at that point?
Yeah, that's a really good question. We were using a number of machines that we had purchased that were already available in industry.
Got it.
And
which are primarily built for, like you were saying, prototyping.
Right. And they're really, really good at doing that. So it's just when it came to making that next step, there's a bit of a surprise. What we found was, although in most industries there's an ability to scale something up and get reduced costs based on raw inputs being decreased, discounted, this doesn't happen in the 3D printing industry, particularly within the materials market. So as an example, we had a high-end 3D printer. The materials were $1,000 a pound. Think of how many products in the world are over a pound and made of like a polymer material. Quite a few.
Yeah, they can't cost that much.
Right. And if you ordered in volume, yeah, you'll get a discount, but we're talking 10%, so $900 a pound.
still outpricing a lot of products from the market. That doesn't quite work.
Now, when you look at other manufacturing technologies like injection molding or CNC machining, have economies of scale, right? So things that actually drop in cost as you order more volume. With injection molding, usually there's a upfront cost just getting into it because they have to produce the tools that everything gets molded with. But your materials are actually commodity.
Sure.
There are large competitors offering millions of pounds of this stuff and a number of different types of materials. So the competitive pressure drops the prices at scale. And that's what we as consumers see as a benefit when we actually order our products, because somebody else made them in bulk to get all those prices down.
Andrew, if you prototype something using 3D printing technology, how easy or difficult is it to then just say, now I want to go injection mold this?
That's a good question. In some cases it's easy, but in some cases it's not. I guess it depends on if the person that's designing the product knows the constraints in both applications or both manufacturing technologies. For instance, injection molding, you need to have certain angles in all of your parts so that when the mold is released, your part pops out and doesn't get stuck inside. In 3D printing, that's not an issue at all. You can print things that couldn't be injection molded. So, if somebody were to design just with 3D printing in mind, they're going to have an issue when they go to injection mold. But if they're designing for injection molding, the 3D printer is going to handle that no problem.
Okay, that's interesting.
The question I have, Andrew, is just a level set, going to the next step, prototyping, what are the thresholds of that? Is it, up to 50 prototyping, up to 150? Just to get, a level set or grounding here of what is scaling in your mind.
Sure. I mean, when I'm talking about scale, I'm not, talking about 100 or 1,000. I'm kind of talking about when you start trying to produce tens of thousands of units or hundreds of thousands of units, the economies of scale, just really aren't there, at least not in the same sense as, let's say, the injection molding market or machining market, where everything basically comes down to your raw material input.
And Andrew, is that pretty much purely because of the material that's going into the machines, and that injection molds take a more commoditized material?
In my personal opinion, I would say yes.
We'll
People may
take your opinion as expertise on this call, because you've I think you've got more of it here than Dan or I in that area.
You learn a lot of things over time. So, yeah, it's a very interesting market dynamic, and that's kind of the problem that I initially set out to solve, was trying to figure out a way to bring these costs down so that it actually makes sense. Because on the surface, 3D printing is a great asset. You can create incredibly complex products. You can create something that's customized to an individual. You can use a number of different materials without having to do really significant changes in your setup. So, if you wanted to print one thing one day out of some, customer material, and then pivot to something else the next, you don't really have a whole lot of downtime that you would see with other stuff. So it's very interesting that, that dynamic of scale just, in my opinion, we're talking about, tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of units. The cost doesn't change a whole lot at that scale.
So Andrew, is that really what you're obsessed with? I mean, when I hear 3D printing, there's a few things that I get as a fellow technologist, right, who's on other exponential technologies, and that is personalization, print on demand. I would hear things like, okay, a UPS truck could be 3D printing down the road as they're delivering something to you to get this on demand, or something that is different, out of date, mass personalized, whatever you wanted. But then there's the other side of the equation, right? Other than hyper personalization is hyper scaling. And so in terms of uniqueness or personalization, that still applies to you. I mean, but you're not really in this on-demand onesie twosies, the long tail, more like, just kind of mass scaling up and doing a paradigm shift from that, electronics manufacturing, whatever it may be, offshore in China kind of a thing, and kind of get it over to, maybe it's not a global question, more so like what is the most productive? That's a long-winded way of saying, is most of your cross to bear is really mass scaling of 3D printing?
Yeah, tough question to answer, I guess. So yes and no. So yeah, certainly that's our end game. When you talk about companies like Tesla or SpaceX, right? They have these grand visions. SpaceX wants to bring people to Mars. They're not there yet. They're taking the concrete steps to get there, right? For us, our grand vision is to have 3D printers be, super competitive at mass manufacturing. We're not there yet, so we're taking the concrete steps. So while we are doing some work on that already, we found that there's also this need to, educate your customer and kind of walk them through. So while we do some projects that have, larger scale, we also do some projects that are smaller scale, just simply because we have capabilities that no other 3D printing firm has. So, we can walk those customers through, show them, the cost benefits, and then if they choose to scale up, that's fantastic, right? So right now we're kind of in the early stages of making that transition, and really showing the customer why this is different than everything else that they see, because there's a lot of noise out there, right?
So what are these areas? What are these key hurdles that you're trying to overcome to scale?
Sure. So, I guess I'll talk a little bit more as to how we're specifically addressing, that materials gap, and some of the other, changes when you talk about industrial 3D printing. So there's a big difference between industrial 3D printing and desktop. When we start talking to companies that produce products, they want something that is produced with a production grade material. And when you look at, a lot of desktop 3D printers, particularly the ones that are, you know, a couple $100 now, they're very limited on what they can print. Like a PLA material produces, you know, really interesting looking things, but for a lot of applications, the material wouldn't be durable enough for an end product. So part of this is being able to 3D print the production grade materials. The other part of it is being able to print them cheaply, you know, for your customer to actually benefit from implementing that change in their supply chain. So at, you know, super low volumes, like let's say under 10 units, totally makes sense to 3D print. At larger volumes, it really didn't. So what we started focusing on was creating a new 3D printing technology that took a material supply that was scalable. When you look at 3D printer filament that goes in the desktop machines, the 3D printing filament's actually made up of injection molding material. They just put it into a different shape. So normal injection molding machines take these pelletized plastics and polymers. 3D printer takes this, you know, filament strand. Now, the materials might be the exact same for you know, a given blend. However, when you buy injection molding materials at scale, they're $1 to $2 a pound. And when you buy 3D printer filament, you know, some of these you're looking at, you know, $50 to $200 a pound. I've seen some up to $600 for some of the exotic stuff. So there's, you know, really an incredible markup that's going on. And in my opinion, you know, it's kind of a bubble. It's a great business if you're in it, but it's not very sustainable because eventually, you know, somebody's going to figure out how to make it cheaper, and then your competitive advantage is gone. For us, we see the market benefiting if that happens sooner rather than later. So we started building machines around injection molding materials. So, you know, we can drop our materials cost as the product scale, just like the injection molding industry.
And how does that filament like change from injection molded material versus, you know, 3D printing filament? Like what is the major criteria? What is the difference?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes, so I guess let's be clear. The companies that are out there making the 3D printer filament, their focus is on, you know, making polymers print quickly. So things like materials need to melt fast. Not all materials melt at the same rate. So sometimes they'll put additives in it to change it a little bit. Or sometimes they'll just take the exact same thing and just put it in a filament form and mark it up, you know, 10x. We've seen, you know, both situations happen with the materials market. Now the key difference, you know, in realizing this change of building machines that take injection molding materials, for any material that you put into a 3D printer, it requires a lot of calibration to get the settings right. And you're talking about managing 20 to 50 different variables in real time and trying to dial all of those in to a point where you're 2% within the optimal level of process range, right? So I'm getting a little technical here, but
technical is okay, I think, for this audience.
So you really have to get something that's super dialed in. And the trouble with injection molding materials are that there's a lot of very large manufacturers, and they all produce a lot of different varieties. Now, the sheer amount of data needed to calibrate everything would just be unachievable. Like, that goal really isn't achievable in any short period of time. So with 3D printer filament producers, they pick a couple, they'll sell the filament, figure out the printer setting requirements are roughly what they are. They'll get you to like 80%. And so when you buy it, you still have calibration to do, but it's not as much. When we started to make this transition, you know, our first customer project, we took an injection molding material. It took us 3 months with 3 engineers. to figure out how to print this correctly and maintain process stability. Now this is where it kind of gets exciting. So I know I've talked a lot about, the differences of desktop and industrial 3D printing and what some of the hurdles are that we have to overcome. So as you guys know, artificial intelligence has been, something that has been impacting a lot of different industries. 3D printing is one of those where I'm actually the most bullish on. And that's because, these things that we were talking about with like calibration, it's a standardized process. It's repetitive. It has to be done over and over again. And you have to accumulate a lot of data. And then you have to make decisions on that data. Something that has a pretty good, I think, application fit. So we started to actually integrate some AI capabilities into our calibration. And we got that, 3 months with 3 engineers down to about 24 hours and self-automated. That impact is just incredible.
Wow.
So
what kind of data were you collecting to do that?
So we're looking at, I guess, mostly process variables.
Mm-hmm.
So things like different process point temperatures, humidities, flow rates, also environmental considerations like outside of your printer, and quality considerations like 3D printing material or injection molding materials like batch. Sometimes there are some slight variations from batch to batch. So we're trying stuff, and in our first study, as an example, we took 600 million data points. That got us to about 92% accurate in our first shot.
Nice. Try number one.
Try number one. You really can't go wrong. That's like an A in college, right?
So that, what the reading that I've done is, like you said, optimizing the process, but also, are you thinking of expanding it to also expanding the range of materials out there to see, particularly as you're going for this injection molded materials versus 3D printed, specialty filament, the art of the possible would be looking at how many different materials can you work with, and this is where I'm really out of my element because it's definitely mechanical engineering,
Sure. Yeah, we're definitely looking at it, so our system that we built, we tried to be very open-ended because the materials market it has such a wide range. Materials require different process times. Like it has to flow through your system in a certain period of time, otherwise the material gets destroyed. So there's different, flow rates needed. There's also different melt temperatures or process temperatures. Some materials melt at 50 degrees Celsius. Some of them melt at 400. That's almost a factor of 10. So we needed to build something that was super adaptable to cover all of these different ranges, and then we were able to kind of use the AI data to test different endpoints. So we tested something that would be within, I guess, a good guess of where the correct ranges of this stuff were. And then we intentionally chose outliers to, really make sure that we had good points and bad points covered in our models.
This is really interesting to me. This reminds me of the auto industry in a way, that it's a bunch of exponential technologies converging at once in this one particular industry, and one, you have material science that are making tons of headway on product and developments. You have sensors and data and MEMS technology that's being able to, drive costs down and commoditization there. Data is becoming cheaper, as well as, and this is all converging in 3D printing. It's really quite fascinating. So it's like you said, it's open-ended. You're going to be constantly changing and adapting to development, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And, some of the stuff coming out of this, so we went into this looking for just a benefit in reducing our calibration time and becoming more accurate in that. And I thought, that's a pretty achievable goal. 3 months is a really long time as a starting point. There were some, I guess, pleasant surprises, some things that we found out. And these are really centered around applications. So our initial intention being just to save time and increase our accuracy. What we found was we could actually use these models to also predict what your end product performance would be. So, and you can also use it for optimization. So,
and Andrew, what do you mean by performance?
Right. So let's take shoes for an example, because coming from Maine, Maine used to be a huge manufacturing hub for the footwear industry, and we've done some work in that industry, so we know a lot about it. Shoes, as an example, have certain performance metrics like rebound. So runners want to make sure that they can run efficiently, that when they put energy into every step, that they get some of that back that propels them into the next step. Somebody that's hiking might need shock absorption if they're going up and down large boulders, so that the hike is easier on their joints. These are things that are quantifiable. So when you start taking your 3D printing data and you start testing your end products and you start overlaying your performance data on things like shock absorption or rebound, you can also generate trends, not only to keep your product being produced consistently, but also how to produce it consistently in an optimized way. So if you needed to get 5-10% additional rebound, a lot of times a manufacturer will just choose a different material. Well, sometimes you have additional wiggle room within your process windows, and this is showing us just that we could modify a process and actually achieve a better result and do it in an automated fashion.
And Dan, I'll add too, and I guess full disclosure, some of this I've seen because I'm an investor in Andrew's company, and I'm also on his board. But when you're talking about the different materials that could be used, Andrew mentioned the footwear just now, and we're talking about urethanes, squishy, midsole type of materials. Seen those go through Andrew's machines, all the way to, I think, as of recent, polycarbonate, which I don't know. The example that I like to go to all the time is it's the glass in hockey arenas. Well, not glass, but you know what I mean. The clear material that protects spectators' teeth from flying hockey pucks, which is a very different type of material, which Andrew, I imagine, requires probably more heat, along with a lot of other variables to make sure it prints right.
Yeah, we've definitely looked at a number of different materials. Like, most elastomers require lower processing temps and stuff like that. We've gotten into some exotic things like, specialty grades of polycarbonates, polyamide polymers like Ultim, used in like defense industries, even, PEAK, which is used in medical and also like dental stuff. All of these have, wide ranges of applications, but are super costly to produce, like for injection molding. And so we're actually, on some of that stuff, we're seeing a cost drop without any optimization, going into them. But, our ability to really produce stuff from a wide range of materials has really opened up that benefit for us to realize.
So, Andrew, where do you think when you pivoted to 3D printing, injection molded material, where do you think, is there certain boundaries on that? I mean, maybe that goes down the rabbit hole of material science in general, but like, is there some bounds? Is it open-ended and you're excited to kind of continue exploring and experimenting with a variety? Is this a whole new process where you can think it could be game-changing and redefining the whole scope of 3D printing? Like, where put it in context for us.
Sure. So, when you ask yourself the question of, or I guess when any of the listeners also ask, why hasn't 3D printing taken over? We heard that would happen, 10 years ago. Everything is still expensive, and 3D printers have limited ranges on the materials they can produce. Also, all we've seen is customization. What happens if customization is the new norm? Right now, everything that has been designed in our world has been designed for mass production because that's the only way that it makes business sense to produce. If we start seeing, costs come down and basically become equal for a product that is customized versus a normal product that's not, that's a pretty big societal shift. And some of the benefits, I don't think that we could really fully appreciate until it happens. But imagine, ordering shoes and always having the perfect fit, or sunglasses that always, fit, or, something that has a unique, squishiness for a shock absorber in a car. All of these things could be mass produced cheaply and quickly. And a lot of times, that question about 3D printing and the speed of 3D printing, well, when you actually look at the time that it takes for somebody to injection mold something at scale, 3D printing, I would argue, in a lot of cases is already faster. Somebody that invents something and brings it to market, a lot of times that's, 1 to 2 years to get something to be produced to the point of a customer actually purchasing it. With 3D printing, it's overnight. So if we can figure out how to do this, in our case, building a lot of very large 3D printers, it means that businesses or designers, businesses that produce products or designers that work for them, you could develop something and bring it into the market very quickly. And that's some of the stuff that we saw with the COVID crisis emerging. You saw a lot of 3D printing hobbyists that had this capability and just started to produce parts that the industry otherwise couldn't have scaled as, to produce, at least not as quickly. So, just looking at this broadly, I'm seeing timelines being dramatically shifted, going from, years to basically overnight for producing product. So also being able to address, new trends, and also bringing in customization as an equal cost point to something that is not customized.
Well, what I applaud you for, Andrew, is kind of looking at the problem from a different perspective, and looking at industrial manufacturing as the focal point, looking at material science as barriers, and chopping up these problems that can be worked on. Do you see yourself, having to kind of rejigger the entire machine to work on, not necessarily manufacture, filament or materials, but other parts of the process that might have been thought of or designed incorrectly? Are you the only one doing this? Are there other people trying to attack the problem like this as well that you look to for thought leadership, or are you kind of in your own vortex, calibrating all these things in your mind?
Right. So, yeah, absolutely. There are people that have laid the foundation that came before us. A good example is there was a group that took 3D printing from what used to be something that was very limited to college campuses in some research lab. And they saw it as an opportunity to produce highly intricate parts, as a production asset. And they ended up doing that and produced what was now known as GE's fuel nozzle that goes into their engines. This group, the leader of it, Greg Morris, was now called the king of 3D printing by industry magazines. I'm not making this up. And what I see is an application that he took, and really it came down to the economies in those products. But they were very focused on things that could still justify high cost. So they were able to make the business benefit from this, and it made business sense because they took what used to be 20 different processes with 20 different components produced into a single assembly to a single 3D printed part. Therefore, saving money and time in the production of that final assembly. So
probably increasing quality too.
Right. Yeah, definitely. So, certainly we looked at some of these examples in the history of 3D printing as inspiration and kind of these glimmering pieces of hope for where the industry should go, at least in our mind. And then we kind of say, all right, let's build on that and try to take it to the next step. In terms of our machine, there's a lot of things that we needed to do that you can't otherwise do unless you have control of every component. So our 3D printer platform was 100% custom developed, built, all the software, all of the components in it. So, it took a lot of time, but now we have something that we can control every aspect on and really take full advantage of AI.
That's great. What do you think, Andrew? I mean, I think a lot of it has been articulated in this conversation, but what are some other things that you think is missing from the 3D printing dialogue and industrial printing from your perspective?
Right. So I think a lot of people may not know that 3D printing has actually been around for quite some time. It wasn't in the early 2000s that it came into the scene. It's just in the early 2000s that people were able to get around existing patents to actually build it. I think there's a disconnect.
The beauty and the downside of patents, right?
Right. So I think there's a big disconnect as to what 3D printing can currently do and what people think that it can do. And also the timeline of when is this all going to come into fruition? Some of this stuff we talked a little bit about already, but I think the big thing that we're seeing really is design for manufacturing. And what I mean is product designers at every organization, they might have an idea, or they might be trying to solve a huge societal problem. They might be trying to solve a small problem. In either instance, if they're developing a product to be the solution, they're forced to think within the constraints of existing manufacturing technology. So somebody may be able to design something that would be fantastic for whatever application, but it might not actually be physically possible to produce that. So when we start looking at 3D printing, I really think that that's going to be one of the biggest things. I guess one of the biggest benefits coming out of, everything that we're doing, but also everything that the entire industry is doing. When you're able to reduce the boundaries of somebody's creativity, you really unlock a new potential for new products, services, and the societal benefit of things that couldn't physically happen before.
It's fantastic. I mean, Andrew, what do you attribute that to? Is that your thinking pattern, the people that you're surrounded by, being new or young, or or just not constrained, like you said? Like what's been the impetus there?
Yeah, I think the big thing was just, at least for us, understanding what the problems were, and then, having conversations with customers and actually hearing feedback. Some of these people said, "Oh, this is the way that we design it because this is the way that we've always designed it."
I've heard that sentiment in industries before.
It's
Usually
like, okay,
it doesn't last too long.
Right. So you're trying to solve an innovative problem that may or may not be something that everyone in the world is thinking about, and something that desperately needs a solution. And this is your response for your approach. Something that is novel requires, I guess, in a lot of instances, a new way of thinking. So having boundaries is just not something that is super productive in coming up with solutions. At least, that's my take on that. Some other people may argue that unwarranted risk makes no sense at all. We like risk.
Well, it reminds me a lot of SpaceX, right? In the reusable rocket. I mean, it's just the fact that they had to think of the problem, like, why has it always been done this way? Why, technically we could land or reuse a lot of these parts and costs, and breaking it up one piece at a time. And that's what I kind of see you saying. It's a long road to the promised land, but it is very achievable, and it's moving in that direction. Part of the issue with 3D printing, you're right, is that the promise has been so great, and then it just went kind of quiet. It was on
right.
the stage, and it went quiet. But it's like anything, like the Gartner hype curve, right? There's this hype cycle, and then there's the plateau of productivity, which you guys are racing towards, and all these other tools. And I just find in Tom and my journeys, like, we'll have to, embrace a variety of enabling layers of technology, like AI, like material science, like for 3D printing, cloud technologies, data science. And it's not for the faint of heart. I could tell that, Andrew, as you guys are burning the midnight oil. So I give you a lot of props for all that hard work. Where can people find more about you and Cobbler Technologies so that they can stay up to date?
Oh yeah, sure. So we have a website up. Feel free to visit www.cobblertechnologies.com. Inquiries can be sent to info@cobblertechnologies.com. And anybody interested in either working with us or exploring this more, we'd love to discuss. So.
And Andrew, but I want to make sure you get a chance to mention too. You mentioned some of the areas in footwear where you've worked. Given the state of the world as of recent, which has caused a lot of companies to say either what can I do or how do I need to pivot. What's been your focus as of recent?
Yeah, sure. So obviously there's some work that we have ongoing that doesn't stop, but we also saw a unique opportunity to use some of our production capacity to innovate. So one of the things that I specifically was looking at is air filtration. I think is an area that requires I guess a lot more concentration on. So,
well, it's certainly an area on all of our minds as we're all wearing masks as we go out, filtering air that's coming in and going out of ourselves every day.
So you think about air filters, and the first thing to come to mind may be a mask, right? Like an N95 mask, and there are filtration requirements of that. In actuality, there are a lot of things that require air filtration at high levels. So medical equipment like ventilators. Every ventilator has at least 1 to 2 air filters in line. The U.S. just boosted ventilator manufacturing beyond anything that we've ever done, and they did not boost the consumable, production parts. So we'll have tons of ventilators, but there's going to be a shortage in things like filters, at least unless somebody does an act to start producing more. And I know the U.S. government is engaging in that. So that's one application. CPAP, BiPAP machines, cars. There are a lot of things that require air filtration. So when we looked at this, everything for the most part is like, fabric HEPA filters, which work fantastic. The one downside is they have a shelf life. So, single-use masks that you'd buy, they may have a few hours to a day or something like that. But when we started running out of masks, you saw a lot of people talking about how do you wash them? How do you sanitize them? So that we could get more usable life out of them. That's what we focused on. So we, actually created an air filter. We had Carnegie Mellon University test it, and came up with something that was, reusable. At least right now, it looks like would have an indefinite life cycle. Filters out at above an N99 level, and can be produced at the same cost as a normal filter, as a single use. So, that's, I guess, a key area that we've been focusing on, in addition to just producing the things that everybody sees, like, face shield components or ear savers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have to admit, I did know about the ear savers because I have a whole bunch of them that my wife, who is a nurse, is delivered to Maine Medical Center out here. So thank you for that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you very much, Andrew. We look forward to, staying in touch and maybe doing this again as you kind of lick these major problems on the way to becoming an industrial magnate. But I really definitely appreciate what you're working on and the goals that you have. We wish you much success and look to following you in the future as a trailblazer in this space.
Awesome. Well, yeah, thank you so much, Dan, for having me on, and Tom, thank you as well.
Mm-hmm.